Hello everyone, and welcome back to another story on our channel. A journey of loyalty, memory, and the quiet miracles that still live in the heart of summer. At peaceful Cedar Lake, retired war veteran Jack Harlow thought he had finally found calm, until his loyal German shepherd, Ranger, suddenly leapt into the storm and dragged a dying puppy from the dark water. Around its neck hung an old rusted military tag, marked with the number of Jack's vanished unit, erased 15 years ago. The storm broke, lightning flashed, and with it came a secret that refused to stay buried. The summer rescue at Cedar Lake, where loyalty can heal even the most broken souls. If you find this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel and give us a heart to motivate us to make more touching videos. Let's continue the story together. The sky above Cedar Lake turned from gold to grey in minutes, the wind twisting through the pine trees like a warning. Rain began to fall in thick, slanted lines, drumming against the old cabin roof where Jack Harlow, a weathered man in his mid-40s, stood repairing the edge of his small fishing boat. His tanned arms were scarred from years of war, his shoulders broad but weary. A faint streak of silver ran through his short brown hair, and his eyes, sharp, grey, and tired, held the weight of too many things left unsaid. Jack was a man who spoke little, but thought too much. Every summer storm still carried the smell of sand and gunpowder in his mind. Beside him, Ranger, his 10-year-old German shepherd, rested by the dock. The dog's fur was a blend of steel grey and tan, his muzzle white with age. His ears twitched at every sound, muscles taut even in stillness. A soldier who never retired. Jack often joked that Ranger had more discipline than most men he'd served with, but deep down, he admired the dog's quiet loyalty. They had both seen things no one should, and silence had become their shared language. Jack patted Ranger's head, murmuring, "Almost done, buddy," before tightening the last bolt on the boat's railing. Then it happened. A sudden flash of lightning, followed by a guttural bark that split through the roar of rain. Ranger bolted down the dock, his body a streak of motion against the storm. Jack shouted, dropping his wrench, boots splashing through puddles. He saw the old shepherd leap straight into the black water without hesitation. For a heartbeat, panic froze him. Then instinct kicked in. Jack grabbed a rope and rushed to the edge, scanning the churning waves. "Ranger!" he yelled, but the storm swallowed his voice. Out of the grey mist, Ranger re-emerged, paddling hard, something limp caught in his jaws. Jack waded knee-deep into the freezing water to pull them ashore. When he finally saw it, his breath caught. A small puppy, barely alive, fur soaked and tangled with lake weeds. Blood streaked its paw, and a faint metallic glint hung from its collar. Jack knelt in the mud, his hands trembling as he unfastened the tag. A cold rush flooded through him when he read the worn engraving, Unit 47A, Delta Squad. The number wasn't random. It was his unit, the one erased from every record after a mission gone wrong 15 years ago. The storm intensified, lightning reflecting in Jack's glassy eyes as he stared at the tag. He pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the old scar beneath his shirt ache like a memory clawing its way back. Ranger stood close, whimpering softly, nudging the small puppy's body, as if urging it to live. "Easy, boy," Jack whispered, voice shaking. The puppy's chest fluttered weakly under his palm, its breathing faint but steady. "We'll call you Lucky," he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. In that moment, under the hammering rain and thunder's echo, Jack understood. Fate wasn't finished with him yet. Morning broke soft and golden over Cedar Lake, sunlight glinting off the rippling water and the damp boards of the old dock. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of coffee, rain-soaked wood, and the faint antiseptic tang of healing wounds. Emily Harlow, Jack's 12-year-old daughter, knelt beside a blanket near the hearth where the rescued puppy slept. She was a small girl with long auburn hair tied loosely, freckles scattered across her nose, and eyes the colour of lake water, clear and curious. There was gentleness in her every movement, the way she dipped a cloth in warm water, the way she whispered, "You're safe now, Lucky." Her calmness was a strange inheritance from her mother, who had passed 5 years ago. Emily had grown quieter since then, her laughter rare, but when she smiled, it softened the room. Jack stood near the window, one hand holding his coffee, the other turning the cold metal tag between his fingers. He had cleaned it the night before, but the engraving still seemed to breathe old ghosts. Unit 47A, Delta Squad. His mind replayed the desert, the explosion, the radio silence, the day his team was erased. The tag wasn't just familiar, it was impossible. It had been fashioned from a specialized fragment of a field drone casing, the kind built by Apex Defense Systems, a company he had once trusted and later blamed for cutting corners that cost men their lives. His jaw tightened. That shouldn't exist anymore, he muttered. The thought gnawed at him. Who had made this, and why had it found its way to him through a dying puppy? Emily looked up from Lucky, sensing her father's tension. "Dad?" Her voice was small but steady. Jack forced a half smile, though the lines around his eyes deepened. "Just thinking, kiddo." She had learned early to read his moods like weather. The stillness before a storm, the way his shoulders squared when memories crept close. Ranger, lying near the door, lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked. A low growl rumbled from his chest, deep and warning. Jack followed the dog's gaze toward the western woods. Sunlight flickered through the trees, but beyond the shimmer, something metallic glinted, then disappeared. That evening, while Emily fed Lucky milk from a small bowl, Jack took his flashlight and walked toward the tree line. The forest smelled of pine and wet earth. Ranger stayed close, his tail stiff, body alert. Halfway down the trail, Jack noticed tire tracks pressed into the mud. Fresh, too clean for the back roads near the lake. Then he saw the faint impression of boot prints beside them, large, military-grade soles. He crouched, running his fingers along the tread. Whoever had been here wasn't a camper or tourist. As he stood, a flash of headlights blinked once through the trees, then vanished. He froze, pulse quickening. Ranger growled again, louder this time, but Jack placed a hand on the dog's neck. "Easy, boy, not yet." He knew surveillance when he saw it. Back at the cabin, Emily was drawing on the porch, her bare feet swinging above the step. She looked up as her father returned, sweat dampening his shirt despite the cool air. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Jack nodded, too quickly. "Yeah, just some folks fishing early." He sat beside her, forcing calm, though his heart still hammered. Lucky stirred in her arms, whimpering softly in sleep. Jack watched the small dog's chest rise and fall, his mind tracing the connection between a forgotten war, a burned-out defense contractor, and the ghostly lights in the woods. He whispered, more to himself than to her, "The past always finds a way back, doesn't it?" Ranger shifted at his feet, restless. The summer air felt heavier now, like something was watching from the shadows, waiting. Dawn broke cool and silent over Cedar Lake, mist rolling low across the pines as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Jack tightened the straps on his worn backpack, a revolver holstered at his hip, and motioned for Ranger to stay close. The dog's ears flicked forward, his nose working the damp air. They moved through the western woods, boots crunching over pine needles and fallen branches, following the faint tire tracks he had seen the night before. Jack's instincts, once sharpened by war, dulled by years of quiet, now thrummed alive again. Each gust of wind brought whispers from a past he wasn't sure he wanted to remember. He knew this kind of silence. It was the same kind that came before ambushes in the desert. They reached the edge of a clearing where the trees thinned, revealing an old supply shack half hidden by weeds and rusted fencing. The roof sagged, its metal panels eaten by time and moss, but faint marks in the mud near the door told another story. Someone had been here recently. Ranger sniffed the ground, his body low, tail stiff, a low growl vibrating from his chest. Jack approached cautiously, pushing the door open with the barrel of his flashlight. Inside, dust swirled like smoke in the beam of light. The air reeked of oil, iron, and something acrid. What he saw next froze him. Rows of metal cages lined the walls, some broken open, others stained dark with old blood. Chains hung from the ceiling, and in one corner lay a dented medical crate stamped with faded black letters. Apex Defense Experimental Unit. Jack's pulse quickened. He crouched, brushing dirt off the crate, revealing a serial number that matched one of the drones from his old mission in Helmand Province. "God damn it," he muttered. His mind raced. Apex had promised to shut down that program after the disaster. But the evidence here said otherwise. Ranger barked sharply, drawing his attention to a half-torn document pinned to the wall. A shipment manifest. The words "Canine Adaptation Sequence" leapt off the page. "They're breeding and testing them," Jack whispered, realization hitting like a bullet. He felt bile rise in his throat. Behind him, a floorboard creaked. Jack spun around, gun raised, and froze when he saw Emily, standing pale in the doorway, eyes wide. She wore her denim jacket over her pajamas, hair tousled, her face streaked with fear and rain. "I followed you," she stammered. "You were gone too long." Jack's anger flared. Not at her, but at the terror of what she had walked into. "Emily," he said sharply, lowering the weapon, "you should have stayed at the cabin." Her lower lip trembled. "Dad, what is this place?" He hesitated, torn between truth and protection. Something bad. Something that should have died with the war. The words came out hollow. Ranger's sudden bark shattered the silence again. Both turned toward the far end of the shack, where the faint sound of an engine echoed through the woods. A vehicle, large, heavy, moving closer. Jack's instincts screamed. "We have to go," he said, grabbing Emily's hand. She looked back at the cages one last time, her expression caught between horror and heartbreak. As they slipped out the back into the mist, Ranger stayed behind a moment, growling at the dark interior before following. The forest swallowed their figures as headlights cut briefly across the clearing, then vanished. For the first time, Emily saw her father truly afraid, and she understood that the monsters of war didn't always stay overseas. Sometimes they built their own cages in the woods. The sun was sinking behind the ridge, staining Cedar Lake with long streaks of amber and red. Jack sat on the porch, sharpening his old hunting knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel against stone blending with the soft panting of Ranger beside him. The air felt too still for summer. From inside, Emily hummed faintly while tending to Lucky, whose small tail wagged each time she spoke. For the first time since the storm, there was almost peace. Almost. Then Ranger stiffened. His ears shot up, nostrils flaring. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Jack's hand froze on the blade. He followed Ranger's gaze toward the narrow dirt road curving past the cabin. A man was walking toward them, his figure backlit by the fading sun. As he drew closer, Jack saw that the stranger moved with the controlled, measured steps of someone trained. Not a tourist, not a lost hiker. The man was tall, early 40s maybe, broad-shouldered but lean, wearing a faded tactical jacket over a black shirt. Dust streaked his jeans, and his face was sun-browned with a stubble that couldn't hide the sharp angles of his jaw. His eyes were a cold, washed-out green, steady and unreadable. "Evening," the man said with a practiced calm, stopping several feet from the porch. "Name's Vince Calder. I work with the local rescue unit. We've been looking for a lost dog. Matches the one your daughter's been nursing." Jack's grip on the knife tightened. "Lucky?" he asked evenly. Vince nodded, his expression polite but too precise, like a script rehearsed one time too many. "Yeah, that pup was part of a training batch we were monitoring. Special case. It's important we take him back before—" He didn't finish. Ranger interrupted with a deep, explosive bark, launching from the porch and placing himself between the two men, fur bristling, teeth bared. Vince didn't flinch. Instead, he raised one hand slowly, palm open, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Still obedient," he murmured, eyes flicking to Ranger with something like recognition. That's when Jack saw it. A black tattoo curling up Vince's left wrist, an arrow piercing a skull. The sight hit him like a shot. That emblem, Black Arrow, a covert mercenary division disbanded after a massacre in Kandahar. Men who had no country, only contracts. Jack had fought beside one of them once and barely lived to tell the story. Didn't think anyone wore that mark anymore, Jack said quietly, lowering his knife but not his guard. Vince's smirk widened, though his eyes stayed cold. Old habits die hard, like old soldiers. He took a step closer, voice softening in a way that felt like a trap. We're both men with ghosts, Harlow, but some ghosts are better left buried. That dog, he nodded toward the doorway where Lucky peered out nervously. That dog remembers things he shouldn't. Emily appeared behind the screen door, clutching Lucky to her chest. Dad, who is that? She whispered. Jack's tone sharpened instantly. Inside, Em. His voice left no room for argument. She hesitated, glancing at Vince, then vanished back into the cabin. Vince's gaze lingered on the door for a moment, then returned to Jack, his tone almost friendly now. You want to protect your family? Then listen. That tag, that pup, they're connected to something much bigger than you think. And people like me, we're the ones sent to clean up what's left. Jack's jaw flexed. If you were here to help, you'd have come with a badge, not a lie. Vince's smirk faded. For a heartbeat, his eyes turned hard. He stepped back into the orange glow of dusk, shadows lengthening around him. Suit yourself, he said, his voice low, almost regretful. Then, leaning slightly forward, he added in a whisper only Jack could hear, but remember this, the dog knows too much. And now, so do you. He turned and walked away down the road, disappearing into the deepening dark, leaving only the faint crunch of gravel and the echo of threat hanging heavy in the air. Ranger watched until the last trace of him vanished, tail rigid, ears still aimed toward the horizon. Jack stood frozen for a long moment, the knife still in his hand. The lake shimmered faintly in the fading light, reflecting a world that suddenly felt smaller and far more dangerous. He finally exhaled, the weight of old fears pressing against his ribs. Black Arrow, he muttered under his breath. Why now? Ranger whined softly, brushing against his leg as if asking the same question. Inside, Emily's voice rose again, trembling. Dad, what did he mean? Jack didn't answer. He just stared into the distance, the last glow of dusk fading into night. Night had settled heavy over Cedar Lake, the cabin wrapped in cricket song and the hum of distant thunder. Inside, the light of a single lantern cast long, trembling shadows across the table. Jack sat with the metal tag laid before him, his calloused fingers tracing its edges as if it were a wound. Emily sat opposite, her brows furrowed in concentration as she cleaned Lucky's collar. The puppy, stronger now, wagged his tail lazily while Ranger dozed by the door. The world might have looked peaceful, but the air between them was taut, filled with the echo of Vince Calder's warning. Jack's mind replayed every word, every glance, every hint of threat. When Emily's small voice broke the silence, it startled him. Dad, look at this, she said, holding up the collar. There's something stitched inside. He took it gently, turning the worn fabric under the lantern's glow. There, hidden under the lining, was a tiny slot, barely the width of a fingernail. Jack pried it open with his knife, and a sliver of metal slid free, no bigger than a grain of rice. A microdrive, he murmured, frowning. The kind used for encrypted field data during covert missions. Emily's eyes widened. You mean, someone put it there on purpose? Jack nodded slowly. Yeah, someone wanted it found. He rose, went to his old duffel bag, and pulled out a battered laptop, a relic from his army days, its keys worn smooth, edges dented. The device whirred to life, screen flickering in the dim light. He inserted the microdrive. For a moment, nothing happened. Then lines of code filled the screen, followed by a map. The continental US, marked with blinking red points. Each dot pulsed like a heartbeat. Coordinates, Jack said softly. Transport routes, maybe. He clicked one at random, opening a file labeled APX, Operation Strainfall. What appeared next made his stomach twist. Photos of animal cages, injection records, and shipments marked for behavioral enhancement research. Emily covered her mouth, horrified. They're using them like experiments. Jack's jaw clenched. No, like weapons. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Faces and names from years ago flashed through his mind. Scientists, officers, men who'd signed off on impossible missions. And one of them stood out. Nathan Collins. He hadn't spoken to Collins in nearly a decade, not since they'd both left active duty. But Collins had always been sharp, analytical, a man who hid emotion behind dry humor. Now, he worked for the FBI's cybercrime division out of Washington. Jack opened his secure line and typed quickly. Need your eyes on this. Urgent. Harlow. He attached the decrypted files and pressed send. Then, for the first time in hours, he leaned back, exhausted. It took less than 10 minutes for the laptop to ping with a reply. Jack, I don't know where you got this, but it's bad. Those coordinates match 3 storage sites tied to missing military shipments from last year's smuggling case. APX is Apex Defense, no doubt. They were supposed to be under investigation, but the trail went dark. Whatever you've found, it's alive again. Stay low. I'll reach out soon. Collins. Jack stared at the message, the room seeming to shrink around him. He felt the weight of inevitability settle on his shoulders, the sense that history wasn't just returning, it had been waiting. Ranger stirred, whining softly. Jack looked down at the dog and whispered, Guess we're going back to war, partner. Emily, still beside him, reached for his hand. Dad, she said quietly, maybe the war never ended. Outside, lightning flickered over the lake, lighting their faces in silver and fear. The rain started just after midnight, thick and heavy, blurring the trees into moving shadows. Lightning split the sky above Cedar Lake, flashing across the cabin walls for a heartbeat before plunging them back into darkness. The lights had gone out minutes earlier, and Jack immediately knew it wasn't the storm. He moved quickly, his instincts taking over. Emily, he whispered, get your shoes on. We're leaving. His voice was calm but urgent, the kind of tone that allowed no questions. Ranger stood by the door, fur soaked and bristling, his growl low and steady. Lucky whimpered softly, sensing the tension. Jack grabbed his old rifle from the rack, the metal cold and familiar in his hands, and peered out through the rain-streaked window. The power line outside had been cut. Clean, deliberate. In the distance, faint beams of light flickered through the trees, moving in coordinated arcs. He counted 4 flashlights. They found us, he muttered. Emily's eyes widened. Who? Jack didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a canvas bag from beneath the stairs, emergency gear, a relic from his survivalist days, and slung it over his shoulder. Follow me, he ordered. The cabin creaked as thunder rolled overhead. Ranger barked once, sharp and loud, then ran to the kitchen corner, where a metal trapdoor lay half-hidden beneath a rug. Jack pulled it open, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. This leads to the old bunker by the lake. It was built during the war, he said, helping Emily climb down first. She hesitated only a second before clutching Lucky close and disappearing into the dark. Jack turned off the lantern, leaving only the flashes of lightning to illuminate the room. He crouched near the window again, watching the tree line. The figures were closer now, silhouettes in rain gear, moving with military precision. One of them carried a suppressed rifle. Another adjusted a headset, speaking into the wind. Jack's pulse steadied, years of training overriding fear. He took aim at a tree near the clearing and fired once, the rifle crack cutting through the rain. The shot wasn't to kill. It was a warning. The intruders ducked for cover. Harlow's armed, one shouted faintly. Jack smirked. Damn right I am, he thought, before retreating to the hatch and climbing down after his family. The tunnel was narrow, the air damp and musty. Old concrete walls lined with moss guided their path toward the lake. Emily clutched Lucky tightly, whispering to calm him. Ranger trotted ahead, nose to the ground, leading the way through the dark. Every few steps, he'd stop, ears twitching, listening for movement above. Jack could hear boots pounding on the cabin floor now. They'd broken in. He motioned for silence, holding his breath. A muffled explosion followed, shaking dust from the ceiling. "They planted charges," he whispered grimly. "They want to bury the evidence. And us." They reached the exit hatch near the lakeshore, just as a beam of light cut through the tunnel behind them. Jack spun and fired once, the muzzle flash lighting the narrow passage. A shout echoed back, then silence. He turned, pushed open the hatch, and helped Emily out into the rain. The storm had turned the world to silver and noise. Ranger barked sharply, then sprinted ahead toward the old boathouse. Lucky barked too, a higher, desperate sound. Jack followed their lead, guiding Emily into the shelter just as headlights from multiple vehicles flooded the tree line behind them. He raised his rifle again, but before he could fire, a new light flashed. This one from the opposite side of the lake. Helicopter blades churned the air. A voice crackled through the rain, amplified by a loudspeaker. "This is Agent Nathan Collins, FBI. Stand down!" Relief and disbelief hit Jack all at once. He lowered the rifle, shoulders shaking. Emily pressed close to him, trembling, as Ranger stood guard by the doorway, growling low but steady until the storm began to fade. The first light of dawn crept slowly over Cedar Lake, breaking through the mist like a quiet blessing. Smoke rose from the smoldering wreckage near the cabin where the firefight had ended only hours ago. The air still smelled of gunpowder and rain, but the violence had passed. Jack stood on the muddy bank, his clothes torn and streaked with dirt, his rifle hanging loosely in his hand. He watched as a group of federal agents moved through the clearing, marking evidence, loading crates, and escorting prisoners. Among them was Vince Calder, hands cuffed behind his back, face pale beneath a sheen of sweat. Even restrained, he carried himself with that same cold arrogance, though the defiance in his eyes was dimmed. Two agents led him toward the helicopter waiting by the shore. Agent Nathan Collins approached from the other side of the field. He looked tired but steady, his khaki shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing a man hardened by years of bureaucracy and regret. Collins was in his late 40s, lean, his salt and pepper hair damp from the rain, eyes sharp behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a file under one arm, and the calm of someone who'd seen too many endings like this one. "You look like hell, Jack," he said, offering a faint smile. Jack smirked back. "You should see the other guys." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the agents secure the site. Collins opened the file. "It's all here." Apex Defense was moving banned biosamples under the guise of animal research. Dogs like Lucky were carriers. Microchips, neural tags, chemical compounds hidden in their systems. They used them as transport because nobody checks a rescue dog. Jack exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. "And Vince?" Collins glanced toward the helicopter. "Former Black Arrow operative. Apex hired him as a security consultant. My team's been tracking his movements for months. We just didn't expect the trail to lead to you." He paused, lowering his voice. "Lucky wasn't supposed to survive. Someone helped him escape. Someone inside Apex." Jack looked down at the small German shepherd pup curled beside Ranger, who lay bandaged but breathing steadily. Lucky's golden brown eyes met his, calm and trusting. "Then whoever that was," Jack said softly, "they gave us a fighting chance." Emily emerged from the cabin, hair tangled, wearing Jack's oversized flannel shirt. Her face was blotched from crying, but when she saw Ranger's tail twitch, her tears turned to laughter. She ran to the dog, kneeling beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You did it, boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ranger licked her cheek weakly, his breath shallow but strong. The morning sun touched them both, golden and forgiving. Jack turned away for a moment, blinking against the light. Collins closed the file and said, We'll take it from here, Jack. You've done more than enough. Jack looked at him, something quiet in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, but peace. Just make sure this never happens again. Collins nodded. That's the plan. As the helicopters lifted off, sending ripples across the lake, Jack stood still, feeling the wind whip through his hair. The sun rose higher, casting warm reflections over the water. Emily walked up beside him, her small hand slipping into his. Is it over? She asked. Jack looked down at her, then at the dogs resting in the soft grass. Yeah, he said after a pause. At least for now. He knelt beside Ranger, pressing a hand against his fur. You did good, partner, he murmured. The old shepherd wagged his tail once. Jack felt the weight of years of guilt, the faces of fallen brothers, the missions gone wrong, slowly ease from his chest. The war inside him, the one he'd never spoken about, finally began to quiet. The lake shimmered, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to breathe. A month had passed since the night the storm took everything and gave something back. The woods around Cedar Lake had grown green again, the air heavy with the scent of wildflowers and pine. Jack stood by the fence of a newly built paddock, wiping sweat from his brow as the morning sun warmed the back of his neck. His once rough hands, scarred from war and survival, now worked for gentler purposes, fixing gates, painting kennels, tending to the rescued dogs that roamed the yard. He had rebuilt the cabin into something new, something alive again. Cedar Lake Rescue Farm, a place where broken things found peace. The sign above the gate, carved carefully into oak by Emily's small hands, read, "For every soldier who ever needed a friend." Emily came running from the barn, her laughter light and full for the first time in years. She wore her hair loose now, the auburn strands catching sunlight as she carried a metal bowl full of feed. "Dad, Ranger's chasing the chickens again," she called, though her tone was more amused than scolding. Jack turned to see the big grey shepherd trotting after a flock of hens, his limp almost gone. His fur had grown back thick around the bandaged leg, and his eyes sparkled with playful defiance. Beside him bounded Lucky, smaller and quicker, his puppy energy undimmed by his past. The two dogs were inseparable now, one old, steady, and wise, the other young, curious, and fearless. "Ranger's teaching him bad habits," Jack said, smiling. Emily grinned back. Or maybe Lucky's teaching him how to be young again. That afternoon, they were visited by Sarah Monroe, a woman in her mid-30s who ran the local veterinary clinic. She was tall and willowy, her fair hair pulled into a neat braid, freckles dotting her pale skin. Her eyes were gentle but sharp, the kind that saw everything and judged nothing. Sarah had lost her husband, a firefighter, 2 years earlier. Since then, she'd poured her heart into caring for animals and the people who brought them in. She arrived carrying a clipboard and a box of medicine, her smile kind but practical. "You've built something beautiful here, Jack," she said, looking around at the open yard and the new kennels. "Cedar Lake needed a place like this." Jack nodded, a faint hint of color rising to his cheeks. "We all needed it," he replied quietly. She studied him a moment longer, sensing the depth of that answer, but not pressing further. As evening fell, the lake turned gold beneath the setting sun. Jack and Emily took a walk along the shore, Ranger and Lucky running ahead, their reflections skipping across the water. The horizon burned orange and violet, the same colors that once lit Jack's nightmares, but now felt like peace. Emily picked up a smooth stone and threw it, watching the ripples spread. "Mom would have loved this place," she said softly. Jack looked at her, his expression tender. "She would have," he agreed. He reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You know, we didn't just rescue those dogs. They rescued us too." Emily smiled, leaning into him as the wind carried the scent of lake water and pine. From the porch of the farmhouse, Sarah waved goodnight before driving off in her dusty blue pickup. The farm settled into its quiet rhythm. Crickets singing, dogs barking faintly in the distance, and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Jack sat on the steps, Ranger's head resting beside his boot, Lucky curled against Emily's legs. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of war pressing on his chest. Instead, he felt something simpler, purer, the warmth of family, the peace of purpose, and the slow, steady rhythm of a life rebuilt. The sun dipped below the horizon, and their laughter mingled with the gentle sound of waves on the shore. A soldier never truly stops fighting, but over time, he learns to fight for something greater than survival. Not for medals, not for orders, but for the fragile, sacred things that give life meaning. For family, for faith, for the quiet mornings that follow long nights of fear. And sometimes that purpose takes the shape of a loyal dog who never leaves his side, no matter how dark the road becomes. In the end, true courage isn't found on the battlefield. It's found in the act of choosing love, again and again, even after the war is over.